You watch TV and all you see is everything's negative.
All day long.
All day long.
Deforestation comes to mind. I definitely have a negative association.
Too many trees.
There's too much competition for water and they're just drying up and dying. It just blows up.
Oh, you're a bad guy.
You're capitalist.
Capitalist and all for profit. My name is George Schmidbauer and I'm here in Willow Creek, California, sitting on a deck overlooking the river.
The wood products industry, I mean, has such an incredible story to tell. There's people that are really hardworking. They are good stewards of the environment. They are doing good for the planet, and just that story is locked away. People don't see it. The general public, it's easy. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm now seeing the logic, because there's a logical shortcut that people are taking in their thinking. The logical shortcut is this: we need trees to make oxygen. Trees are good, trees look beautiful, all the positives about trees. And by cutting them, you're removing them from existence. That's a bad thing. That's the quick, logical explanation of the general public's perspective of cutting and harvesting trees.
A lot of things, people just get used to doing the same damn thing, you know.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it becomes a revelation to them that, why weren't we doing this? They did everything to keep from doing it before, and now everybody saw it. Saw them curved.
What year was that?
Oh, 1987, 86, 87.
Did you start with a single arbor curve or a double arbor?
We started with sash gangs, frame saws. We could do the whole log without any thing on it. We just saw the whole log in a curve.
We want to go all the way back to the beginnings.
Okay.
Today you're in the sawmill business, or you were your whole career. What made you go into the sawmill business? Why the wood industry?
Well, in Willits, where I was raised, it was the timber area. And if you wanted to get a good high-paying job at the time, you went to work in a sawmill.
What year was that?
1948 when I first started.
Were you born?
1930.
So you were born in 1930.
Yeah.
And was your family in the sawmill business at all?
No, my dad was a dentist.
Okay.
My mother was a homemaker. At the time,
move inside pretty soon.
you got to remember at the time, in 1930, we were entering into a depression.
Yep.
And all the sawmills that were operating in the Willits area all closed up. There wasn't anything done until about 1947, about 1947. A couple of years after World War II was over. There was nothing going on during World War II. So about 1947, all of a sudden you see logging trucks start down the highway. And next thing you know, a little sawmill built and then another one. Pretty soon Willits had about 14 plants.
Is that right?
Cutting logs, plywood, remanufacturing. So it was a big deal when I was 17, 18 years old.
Did you go to school?
Yeah.
Did you finish all 12 grades, or how was the school system back then?
Well, our school system, we went from 1 to 6 in one school, 6 or 7 to 12 in the other school. We had the 7 to 12 school had about, 120 kids in the whole school. My class, when we finally graduated, school was growing quite fast at the time because the timber industry was picking up and we were bringing out a lot of people from the South to work in the sawmills, and the shipyards were shutting down. So people were moving back into the timber industry. So anyway, I graduated in a class of about 35.
Yeah. Can you give us like in 1 minute, kind of just big brief overview of your whole career to how you got to from then to now? What are some of those major milestones? And then maybe we can come back and zoom into some of those across your.
Well,
Across your
I
whole
say
career.
I went to college,
Yep.
and when I graduated from college, I got married. And about 3 months later, I got drafted. Went to France with the Corps of Engineers, building airfields. And when I got back out of the Army, they were looking for a surveyor, timber cruiser in Kovalev. Yeah, so we went to Kovalev, which was an Indian reservation of about 500 people. Pretty small.
Yep.
Who was they? Who was looking for a timber surveyor?
Her father had a mill there, and they're buying land, and we had to, run the survey lines. And back in those days, you did with the transit and a steel tape. Did your work, and then the mill, the guy that was running the dry kilns and the lumber yard behind the sawmill got drunk and got fired, and they didn't have anybody take his job, so I started in the sawmill itself at that time.
Oh, okay. Wow. Who was the gentleman that hired you then for that first position?
Her father, or well, it wasn't her father, but it was somebody that worked for him.
What was his name?
Frank Crawford was my father.
And who hired me?
Well, I mean, Frank Crawford then is the gentleman who ultimately kind of hired you.
Right,
Hired
yeah.
you into that business. Did you have a relationship with him? How was your relationship with him?
Pretty good. Yeah. He was more of a timber speculator, but he did have sawmills. But he made his money in buying timberlands.
Okay.
He was a good wheeler dealer,
That's awesome.
which I wasn't. I was an operator. He was the wheeler and dealer.
How old were you when you got hired that position?
The second time, at the Kovalev plant,
Yeah.
24, 25.
So you just came back from Europe
Europe, yeah.
and you were 25 years old and you already had a family at that time?
We had one coming. Our oldest daughter was born about 3 or 4 months after we got to Kovalev.
What happened
She's
next?
68.
What happened next?
Well, we had a couple more. We had Frank 2 years later, and Susie, the one that lives in Texas, 3 years after that. So Kay was born in 55, Frank was 57, and Susie in 60.
And so you started your career there, basically. That was your
Right.
way into the sawmill business.
We started. Then we went to Ukiah.
You were in Ukiah.
Lived in Ukiah for 7 years.
Did you cross paths with the McGehee family there?
I knew the dad, John.
He started the Ukiah machine there, didn't he?
Yeah, and he built equipment for us. The father.
Do you know Ron McGehee, his son?
I know Ron, but we did all our business with it. Ron was a kid.
Yeah.
He was in high school.
I know Ron quite well, actually. I went and visited and stayed at his house right outside Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
several times.
Yeah, he built. I saw the first edger he built was John took us out and showed it to us. It wasn't very big, and it was an interesting concept. It didn't work too well, but
It was the beginnings of something.
yeah. And then McGee's the one that took up on the curved sawing and put it into the edgers.
Right.
He started out with Sierra Pacific Industries.
Wow. What year was this?
Oh, it wasn't very much longer after we started that mill in Texas, probably 3 years maybe. So that being in 1980, somewhere around there. I think the first curved edger he made probably went into Sierra Pacific and Anderson.
So, are you close? Do you know the the folks over at Sierra Pacific?
Oh
Do you
yeah,
know Red Emerson and
they used to live
the family?
They used to live in Arcata.
So you guys know them quite well.
Yeah.
They weren't the Sierra Pacific that it is now, was it?
No. It was pretty good size, but when we moved to Arcata, they probably had 3 or 4 mills.
Wow. They already had 3 or 4 mills by then.
Yeah, they had them over in the Sierras.
Was it Red Emerson who started up?
Yeah, Red.
I met Red by accident in Anderson.
Yeah, Red, and his dad was here, Curly. They called him Curly, but Curly didn't do much. Red did all the expansion.
Wow. So what happened next? You moved to Newtown and getting
we
settled
moved to
in?
Ukiah, and we had I think it was 6 sawmills at the time, scattered over Northern California. And her parents ended up in an airplane accident.
Wow.
And crashed and killed them. And we operated for a while, and the family was wanting to go different directions, so we sold the company to Georgia Pacific.
Georgia Pacific, not Sierra Pacific.
Georgia Pacific.
Okay.
And when we sold the mill to Georgia Pacific, they moved me up to up to Arcata, and we've been here ever since.
It all changed when you were in Ukiah?
Pretty much, yeah. Everything went down the drain. But when I went to work for Georgia Pacific, they moved me up here, and they gave me more sawmills to work, plus in charge of the logging and sawmilling in Alaska.
Alaska?
Ketchikan. They had a pulp mill and a sawmill there, and we're selling cants to Japan and chips to the pulp mill, and the logging up there was interesting.
Did you go up there and see it in person as well?
Well, part way.
Okay.
I spent about a week a month up there.
That's significant.
Yeah. So that was interesting, but that all failed. That whole pulp mill operations
Oh, I see.
wasn't viable.
What position were you in at that point?
Well, I'm not sure. I was in charge of the sawmilling on the West Coast,
Okay.
which included from Alaska to Oroville was the further south we went. Yeah.
What year was this roughly?
68 to about 71, I guess.
And so you're managing all these mills, and then the plane accident happens, or
No, the plane happened in 68.
Okay.
2 years to the day.
GP acquired, and he went with him.
Wow.
How many acres did Crawford's have when they sold the GP?
Probably about 50,000.
Oh, that was it.
Significant.
I had bigger numbers in my head.
It may have been more than that.
He was buying and selling all the time though?
Well, some of that was that at one ranch for 20,000 was held with the partners. The Eden Valley Ranch. Dang. It was,
You want some wine?
and then they had, I need my cocktail over there. They had brook trails and Eden Valley, so he had a lot of deals with partners.
Yeah.
How did you get out of the partnerships when you had to liquidate it?
We traded our interest in some of them for another sawmill, and the land we just sold for cash.
And that's how you liquidated?
What wasn't, you had the Crawford Corporation, and then he had partnerships with these other things that we had to liquidate too, to get out of the partnerships. So we either sold or traded or borrowed or whatever to liquidate all those.
You didn't want to, or you couldn't hold on to them?
She didn't want them. She didn't want any partners. It was her. Otherwise, I think I just hung in there and forgot about it. But she just wanted to clean up, keep everything separate.
Sure.
But all the sawmills that you owned outright, it was different, right?
All the sawmills we owned outright, but then after the accident, there was one in the partnership with the Mays and Hera and all that bunch that we traded that stock for stock in the machine shop that they had. So we ended up with another sawmill after it was stud mill and it was broke, but we ended up with it.
So when all that was said and done and all the trading kind of settled, what were you left with?
We left with 6 sawmills and about, I don't know how much acreage of land. I can't remember, but I think it was around
Move inside of these
60, 70,000. They're not,
Not bad.
It's all good. Land, so 6 sawmills and roughly tens of thousands of acres of timberland?
What did I tell you the first time? I don't know.
50.
50, probably 50.
Okay. So that was then under whose possession?
That was under our possession. That whole thing was sold to Georgia Pacific.
So you sold
All the
that?
timberlands,
Yeah.
sawmills, everything. All the contracts on the Federal National Forest went with it. There was a lot of timber contracts on National Forest.
Were any of the partnerships that you sold out of, anyone still around, or did they all go down?
Are all gone.
And so what kind of happens next in the history?
Well, got tired of living out of my suitcase, and she was mad when I left, mad when I got home, working for Georgia Pacific. So I decided to build a sawmill of our own and start from there.
So you went an entrepreneurial route.
I was thinking the Sierras and she was thinking Arcata, and it just so happened this building came up for sale real cheap, the mill's in now. So I bought it and built a little mill in there, kind of crammed it in there.
What city was this?
Eureka.
That's Eureka. And what did you name it? What's it named now?
Schmidbauer Lumber.
So that was the mill that you started.
Started here, on our own,
It had its 50th anniversary last year.
Yeah. And then that started in 71, and about 72 I started in a partnership with another fellow, and we bought a mill in Mist, Oregon. I don't even know where that is.
I don't.
It's across the river there, Vernonia. You ever heard of Vernonia, Oregon?
Heard about it.
Yeah, it's out the Olympic Peninsula.
Okay.
And we bought that, and then we bought a mill at Klamath, Washington, and one at Clatskanie, Oregon, and had those 3 mills. And seemed like we did something else. But anyway, we sold out to the partner there after 10 years. His boys were coming into it. My son Frank worked up there too at Klamath for a while.
How old was Frank at the time?
Well, he was just out of college, so I think he lived in Vancouver at the time. Drove up to Klamath every day, but then he
Buddy Sig, right?
probably.
He'd like Sig. He's
And then
a trader in Portland.
this big speculative timber binge we were on the National Forest ended, and the mill at Weaverville was sitting idle, and the town of Weaverville was putting the pressure on the owners to do something. They needed the employment, and they weren't willing to, so they sold the mill to me.
That's the one that's called Trinity River Lumber now?
That's called Trinity River, yeah. So we built that one up, revamped it, built it up.
What year did you buy Trinity River Lumber?
You remember? 80. That's about 83, probably 84.
Okay.
We built it up and then sold it
Yeah,
to
because they just had their 40th.
sold it to Frank. And when I sold it to Frank, then I decided to build one in the south.
What year did you sell that mill to Frank?
Probably 86, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And then
I heard there was a fire there, but that comes later,
that
right?
that was way after that.
Okay.
And then we went to the south, 87, and built the mill there, and it's still running.
Which one is that?
That's Caltex Lumber. That's when my daughter Susie runs it.
How'd you decide Nacogdoches?
There was a guy that lived down there that his family had lived in Texas, moved to Arcata, back to Texas, and he came out and decided. I told him what I wanted to do, and he decided where to build the plant. He went through the old timber records and found out where the best spot for logs to build a plant. It was Nacogdoches.
How much, roughly speaking, board feet or comparatively, like size-wise, lumber output were these sawmills doing average per year?
Well, they were all pretty sizable at the time, but now the new mills are so much faster and
Totally
better.
understood.
Like the one we saw today. They produce about at least twice as much as we do in Eureka, probably 2.5 times as much per hour as we do in Eureka.
But at the time, it was.
But
it
at the
was
time,
good.
we were, reasonably. The reasonable mill around there was about 35,000 an hour to 40,000 an hour.
Per hour.
Yeah.
30,000 board feet an hour. What's that roughly in an annual volume, you think?
Well, I've been around probably around 80 million a year on a one shift basis.
Okay. So you sell the lumber mill, the Trinity one, to your son Frank,
Right.
and then you go south a little bit. You do Nacogdoches.
Nacogdoches. Then they sold that to her, Susie.
Okay.
That's been about how many years? 5 years, something already.
At least, maybe
Yeah.
longer.
How do you sell a sawmill to your kid that's
Just you can sell it.
yeah, but
How do you
Cheap.
sell? Yeah. How do you
Out of
sell a
college.
sawmill to your child?
Well, you sell it real. They get it real cheap. Number one, compared to what you'd sell to other people.
can you do that though?
And you can sell at discounts. There's all kind of discounts.
What was your goal for that? So that the mill keeps running for a while, or what was
Well,
your theory there?
You get old and you sell it off to the kids. Let them worry about it.
Yeah.
That's. I don't know. How old when I sold the mill to Frank? What was the year of that?
84.
84. So I was.
Was he chomping at the bit?
Was
or
I?
did you
I was.
tell him he had to take it?
What was I? Well, I'd be 64 then, probably.
You thought you were almost done, huh?
Well, yeah. Yeah. You hadn't planned living beyond
30
70,
years
so
later.
Yeah, right. Who thought you'd live to be this old?
yeah, 70 was pretty old, and when I was,
Jeez.
So did he have to talk you into it, or did you have to talk him into it?
I don't know. We just kind of
I
got
think it just kind of
planned that way to sell it to him, and he was ready to. When he came back from his world junket, he wasn't all that too sure what the hell he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty shaky.
That was just the malaria, I think.
Yeah,
And then he
physically he was shaking for sure.
and he was kind of against the capitalist world. He bought into the hippie stuff going when he was traveling around the world. What do you need a car for? What do you?
Yeah.
Don't need all that stuff. And look at him now.
Yeah.
Big,
What
big.
was it at the house? He's
Christ,
having a fit,
I've-
something.
I've-
I'd be
I've-
in the bedroom or something. He's having a
TVs.
fit, you'd Why are you wasting money? Why did you
Yeah, he didn't like the TVs.
I was always tighter than a tick.
didn't want TV?
And,
Oh, that's-
building stuff, I would do everything on the cheap, and he's splurging big time.
Well, he doesn't spend money on himself.
Not a lot, no.
Oh, brother. These are good.
All right, I don't know about this.
Why are you in the lumber industry?
Because I was born into it, I guess.
Why do you want to stay in it, and why, if you do?
Definitely part of it's continuing the long legacy in my family, and part of it's aligning with my beliefs and sustainability, and I got into architecture and development and wanted to do sustainable design, and that kind of led me right back to wood products, and which I kind of knew that all along.
Yeah. What did you go to school? Did you study before you joined the family business?
Yeah, I studied civil engineering.
Dang.
Really wanted to do architecture, but that program wasn't at the school I was at. I did architectural engineering for a little bit and then had to switch to civil. So I was really interested in buildings and building systems and structures, and wish I could have taken a wood structures sort of emphasis, but that's not really a thing in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to change that.
I mean, I'm working on it with Cal Poly Humboldt. They're slowly realizing that that's a actual future industry. So that'd be awesome.
And worth investing into the young people that could take that
Yeah.
as a career
And
path.
And people that like the environment are realizing they like wooden buildings because it contributes to forest health, and it contributes to just health. If you're spending all this time of your life in a building, it's the biophilic design and the way your body reacts surrounded by wood brings you lots of health benefits too.
George, so how do we go from the 80s to today? What happens next? Kind of in a big milestones. What other milestones happen to once you sell the mills? Then
Not much.
how did North Fork come about? North Fork Lumber.
That's Frank. That's
That just came about. The redwood industry has gone through its old growth, and the second growth redwood industry is completely different marketing strategy than the old growth. The old growth was siding, paneling, all kinds of fancy stuff. Second growth was decking, garden stuff.
Okay.
So when they finally wound up with all their old growth redwood being cut, they had a sawmill there that was basically worthless for second growth redwood or what to do with it. So they decided to get out of the business. Let somebody else worry about the sawmill. Sell redwood logs to somebody, sell the fir logs to another mill, and separate. Don't try to do redwood and fir in the same mill.
Right.
It doesn't work too well. So then they were looking for somebody to sell their fir to. So how they talked Frank into that, I'm not sure, but
Yeah. What were you doing after you sold those mills to your?
I go into the office every day, play the stock market, BS, and that's about it.
Well, that's what's interesting to me about you, sir, is the fact that, how old are you now, if I may ask?
94.
You're 94 right now. And I see you going up into the sawmill and climbing those stairs and going up over catwalks. We were walking with you just the other day.
Yeah,
I thought you must have been in your 70s.
yeah. You didn't see myself pulling myself up that catwalk with my arms.
Yeah. But what motivates you to keep going?
Oh, I don't know, just interested.
What keeps you interested?
Well, I don't know.
There's something about the
Well,
smell.
I've been a sawmiller forever, so I'm just still interested, you know.
And so you saw a whole bunch of change. You saw technology change and all kinds of
yeah.
change. Can you speak a little bit about that? How was it then and how is it now?
Well, the first real technology change was in a fellow by the name of Al Thrasher figured out how to cut with thinner saws than the average mill. And he came to Ukiah, built a mill right alongside ours, and that got me interested in, you know, he made all these claims of what he could do. And so I kind of listened to what he was saying and went from there. Probably the big difference was he never did get into the Stellite tipping
Okay.
of saws.
Yeah.
And when I first came up here, I went to Borneo to look at a timber deal over there. And out in the jungle there were Stellite tipping saws. And I thought, well, that's interesting. If they can do that with native people out in the jungle, Stellite tip, why in the hell can't we?
Right.
So I went to Germany and bought some equipment to Stellite tip.
Mm-hmm.
And that started the Stellite tipping. And
So what was the benefit?
well, the saw stayed much sharper.
For longer. Stay
A
sharp for
normal
longer.
bandsaw bends going around a wheel.
Right.
But the tip, you want real strong and brittle to maintain its sharpness.
Correct.
So that kind of got everybody into the...
What was it before then? Before you did tipping?
Well,
It was just
the way
steel?
you used to do a saw was this swedging shape. You ever heard of that?
No, I didn't. I don't.
Well, you had a machine, a gripper, and you gripped the tooth of the saw and you pinched it up and you pulled the metal out. It was soft enough to pull the metal out.
Uh-huh.
And then they came with a shaper, and the shaper clamped it back into position. Then you ran the saw around a table, and you had a little thing you held in your hand, and you straightened up the teeth as they came by with you had a little thing, you'd just bend them a little bit. And that was the way you got the shape of your tooth. And then when you got that all lined up, wedged out, then you ground it.
So it was just a lot of manual processing. And
A
then
lot of manual processing, but the
So
big
there was a
problem,
big uptick in
it was
production?
soft. It was soft metal.
Yeah.
Because you had to pull it up with this, spread it out with this
So when you went from that process to the new Stellite tips, it increased your, production, your accuracy?
Oh yeah, accuracy, production, everything.
You saw a real substantial uptick there?
Yeah, oh yeah. You could cut thinner
Thinner curve?
and longer cut times.
What other were like some big milestones in the industry that you've witnessed? I mean, now we're talking about 3D scanning and X-ray
Well,
technologies,
yeah,
but how do we go from then to here?
Well, the first scanning was terrible. and when you stop to think about it, the scanners weren't all that bad, but they couldn't deliver into the machine at what they were scanning. So you had to go look at the screen and say, oh, you're doing wonderful. You got this many things. You go out and look at the back of the machine, what came out. And what it told you was coming out were two different things. The machine was worn out and the cants were moving over, and it just what they showed you was going to happen and what happened was now they got everything pretty tight. So if this is what the scanner shows you, you get it.
Okay.
Before they didn't have it, they were on rolls. And if you ever been around a roll will move anything. You get a worn roll, everything moves to the high side, you know. So you start out here and you end up over there, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is so much better with the Stellite tipping and the way they deliver material through the machines, the cutting machines.
You're talking about also
perfect.
curve sawing was a big deal. That was a big technological improvement.
That was another
In
improvement,
sawmilling.
yeah.
So you're able to follow the curvature of the actual cant
Right.
coming through the machine.
But we still do it in Texas by eyeball.
Okay.
We don't have any computers. Everything is eyeball. I imagine we could do a log down there, but I don't know. You still got to have a guy operate the machine, so I don't know if it'd be any advantage. You spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
And these guys get so good at it that they can just curve that log perfect, you know.
Okay. How was the wood products industry different compared to what it is today? In the beginning of your career or throughout your career?
Probably the big difference is old growth versus second growth.
Okay.
Old growth, you had a lot of clear lumber that everybody was trying to make, because that was where the money was. So you tapered your logs, you did a lot of things you had to saw through the clears, then you got the common, and then you had rot and shake, and so you had all these problems within one log.
And when you say old growth, what do you define that?
Oh, 200 years and older,
And so how large are those trees?
500 years old,
Yeah.
30 inch to 60 inch.
60-inch diameter?
Yeah.
And you could run that. How do you process that? Do you run it through a carriage or what?
You did on the carriage, and everything was done on the carriage by eyeball, because the sawyer was grading.
Was
different thicknesses. So you got a clear, you cut one thickness. You got number 2. You got another thickness. You got number 4.
Was the sawyer riding on the carriage at the time?
No.
Oh, they weren't.
You had setter, which had a dial and a rack and pinion,
Okay.
and he would set the cut.
Yep.
He had doggers that were on each knee that had a lever that grabbed the log. So sometimes you'd have 4 guys on the riding on the carriage, and the sawyer would stand. Look.
So what today we have knees on the carriage.
Yeah.
Then you had people doing each one of those?
Yeah. Each knee had a guy
And the guys were riding on the carriage back and forth all day long.
all day long. And they were fast carriages.
Okay.
You had to hold on.
All right. Oh, they had to hold on.
Oh, you bet you had to hold on. So, yeah,
And these carriages are probably quite sizable then.
they were sizable, and they had what they call a steam shotgun. It was moved very fast, not as fast as the new electronics we have, but they were powerful.
Uh-huh.
And, and when you run those, you have to stop that log. You're going fast, and then you stop before the whatever width saw you're running and the end of the log.
Yeah.
You don't want to go beyond that, because when you come back, you might be a little off and tear the saw right off the band mill. So
Wow.
they're going back and forth, single board.
But my grandpa lost 3 fingers when he was working in the sawmill business back in the,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what year it was, but so my point is there's probably a lot more accidents then, and
A lot more accidents, right?
a lot it was a lot less safe then.
Yeah. And the other thing about the mills, sometimes you had to cut 3 different species.
Oh, okay.
Big. So you had all these different grades of lumber coming out of one log, plus maybe 3 species. When we were in Kovalev, we had 4. We had white fir, Doug fir, Ponderosa pine, and sugar pine. All treated and handed different.
You never cut redwood, did you?
Yeah, I've cut a little redwood, but not much.
Not the big old growth redwood?
Just second growth.
Did you hear
Smaller.
stories about guys cutting? Like, when was it that people were actually harvesting and cutting the old growth redwoods?
They cut old growth red up to about 1990. It was all over with pretty much.
But you weren't necessarily involved in that directly?
No.
There are beautiful trees out there now.
Yeah, good to look at.
Yeah, glad that some of them were saved.
Yeah, but the thing is that the old growth redwood has no use anymore. Your hardy plank and all the other sightings are better,
Yeah.
and so there's no reason to, unless you want redwood paneling in your house, which nobody wants anymore. You know, it's a thing of the past.
Okay. All right, folks, buckle up because I'm taking you on a ride today. Let's head out to drive to North Fork Lumber. What's your name, brother?
Niren.
Niren?
Niren, yeah.
All right, guys, this is Niren here. Do you know anything about lumber production?
No, not much.
You
Perfect.
have a mill.
Well, yeah, I mill lumber with my dad. Like,
What's your
at
name?
home.
Freya.
Nice to meet you.
Nice.
Yeah, and then I work with the Forest Service, so I mean, I'm around trees all the time.
What is the general public's take on if you hear lumber or sawmilling or tree, like cutting down trees in the forest? What's the first reaction?
It's not good, and you know, people are angry about it. You know, there's tree huggers and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, generally,
Yeah.
in most people's minds, I would say that it's not something that they support.
Right. And why is that? Just because
Just because it's nature and it's beautiful, and
we shouldn't be cutting down
people
trees,
don't
right?
like, yeah, trees being cut down if they're not like dead or a hazard. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if they're like a healthy living tree, then like. But I mean, how do you think your house is? How do you think you're gonna build a house or a deck or anything? Like, you got to cut trees down.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely like good practices that go into the industry.
Totally.
which
So
makes
you're
it sustainable.
are you working inside the wood products industry then, somewhere?
No, I work with the Forest Service doing like hot shot work.
But you're like involved with the trees and everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll,
So-
we'll cut trees down that are like snags, like.
Freya, what do you think about the lumber industry? What comes to mind when you hear lumber production? You hear
I definitely have a negative association with it, I would say. I
speak
feel
freely.
like
Why?
I mean, you said the word, this is maybe like a buzzword in the thing, but like deforestation comes to mind. And I think like overusing resources in a specific area seems dangerous to me.
Yeah.
And like depleting trees that are being used by native animals and are necessary for other native plants to feed on as they decompose and to like feed off of while they're alive seems like a dangerous thing to me.
Totally.
And I know that like replanting is probably a big part of what you do
Yeah.
to use those resources, but old growth trees take a really, really long time to grow, and replanting them probably takes generations to get back to the point that they were at, which seems like a dangerous thing. And like, I know you and your dad milling is like trees on your property.
Well, not just that, but
Not just that, never mind.
when my dad has a connection with arborists and a tree cutting company, so when they cut down like redwood trees that people need removed for some reason, he'll buy them from him.
Sure. But like small batch.
Yeah, small batches. Another thing I think about is when you do like a clear cutting, or you have a specific, parcel to cut.
Yeah.
For the loggers, and all the trees are gone. Once they go back and replant, it's just reproduction, pine trees or whatever, and all that grows so tightly together, and it's just like really pretty gnarly when fire gets into the reproduction.
Okay, so
We call it reprod.
okay.
So
So fire is super dangerous when there's a lot of fuel
yeah,
at the base of the tree.
like
right?
small fuels that are same height and really tightly put together.
Yeah.
Because like if you go into like an old growth forest or, older trees, there's a lot and they're sort of spaced out pretty well. But then when you have like a bunch of babies growing in a huge area at the same time, it creates this fuel that's just really dense and pretty catastrophic when fire gets into it.
How so?
It
in super
rips,
basic terms.
it blows up. Extreme fire behavior if it's dry.
Yeah.
If it's cured and yeah.
I guess, is there any, my main concern is that when you take something as impactful on an ecosystem as especially old growth trees,
Yeah.
but trees in general, if you kind of eliminate those from an area,
Yeah.
the impact that it has on the rest of the ecology there,
Totally.
is there like action being taken to kind of
Yeah.
counteract that?
Totally. No, let me answer it this way. I have friends that are living right here in the area, and they're running multiple sawmills. And we just had this conversation yesterday where, in a private conversation, we were talking about how, yes, historically, a lot of old growth trees were harvested and too much logging was done in the area. So then everything was like kind of like locked down, like no more logging, and it was really restricted. I don't think the old growth should be touched anymore. Like, it's so beautiful, right? The redwoods, and it's gorgeous to keep those around. So I don't think we should be harvesting, and I think it's legal to harvest those old growth now. But it was overlogged, I think, years ago, decades ago. I talked to loggers, the guys who are out there in the daily, and I asked a facetious question. I was like, so do you show up on a logging site and just kind of like choose a direction for the day and just start clear cutting everything? And the response I got, and you could find this interview on our YouTube channel, it's called the Wood World podcast on YouTube. And I was talking to a logger, and he said, and he was like, dude, we have so much like process to like figure out what to cut, what not to cut, how does it impact ecology and the forest and the birds and the animals. And I just think that the general public doesn't really understand how much like these people are educated in forest management, forest practices, and like they're doing their best, spending their careers researching and like understanding what's best for the environment. Mm-hmm. Or somebody off the cuff can say like, the simple logic I think is this: well, like trees make oxygen, they're beautiful, so don't cut them. So George, is this signs that there's bears around here?
Seems like it.
All right. Maybe we wandered too far into the redwoods at this point. I wouldn't want to necessarily meet him. What kind of bears are here? Are they black bears or brown bears?
Yeah, just black bears.
These guys were the explorers, the redwoods. They died trying and uncovering new maps and territories.
Just kind of the classic take that you shouldn't be cutting trees because that's the environment, and it's, harming the environment by cutting trees, and it hurts the animals, and there's no reason to do it. And, you know, it's sort of the opinion that is easy to arrive at
Yeah.
when you're not really thinking about anything. Like, you're just, you know, it's surface level. Like, yeah, cutting trees, I like the environment, why would you cut them?
Yeah, trees are good. Trees,
simple.
trees make oxygen. Don't cut the trees, right? Like there's simple logic that somebody could easily arrive at, and I feel like that's the general public easy opinion to slip into, right? And then
Yeah, because how would you know the complexities of the industries and like the ecosystems otherwise? But there are people that, you know, study that stuff their whole lives and still end up there somehow.
okay, but walk me through. You said talking to even her specifically, or you know, folks like that, you're easily able to present a series of ideas or facts or things the way that you actually do things that can like convert somebody to our way of thinking, meaning see it from the real industry perspective, which is
I think it probably helps to acknowledge that, like, back in the day, you know, leading up to like the 60s and, you know, 60s and 70s and before,
yeah,
there was definitely overlogging and like poor business practices and like lack of stewardship of the land, and people were coming in
yeah,
and logging and leaving, and that's, yeah, not really a sustainable model, and has been proven to not be sustainable by sort of the decline of the industry in California. And since then, you know, there's a big movement to push back on those bad practices, and now there's regulation in place to prevent that.
yeah,
And that regulation's stable, it's not going away. And now all those bad players are gone, because this is like a long-term business, and if you're playing short-term games and doing things that are giving you a bad reputation, you're not going to be in business very long, and that's kind of what's happened. So people that are left are usually out there for the multi-generational, everyone that I've come across or heard of.
which
Because
is
that's good at this point. That's good business, and you know, they're a capitalist business person, which is maybe what some people would use to like demonize them. Well, if they truly are a capitalist, then they're going to be making sure their forests are healthy and they're replanting and growing again.
and why does that make sense as a capitalist approach too?
So they can continue to stay in business, continue, you know, they cut trees and they replant right after it, and then let those trees grow for 30 years. It's sort of, it's like a crop rotation on like just a long, multi-decade timeline instead of annually. Yeah, so you gotta understand that those are the players that exist today, and they're abiding by all the regulations. And so there's, you know, that in itself should be something that you don't worry about. Like, there's not going to be, it's never going to get out of control where we're losing our forests. And like in California, we're at a point where we've really been tied by regulation, and the industry's declined, and annual logging is about, I think it's, all right, I'll say it the other way. Annual forest growth is like 2 to 3 times what we cut every year.
It's a beautiful statistic.
So it's outpacing us like
Significantly.
Yeah, the industry could double or triple, and we'd just be like, okay, now we're at a stable where we cut as much as the forest grows every year.
George, I wanted to ask you, like, modern day sawmilling, modern day operations, it feels like there's a stigma around, just in the general public's perspective, there's a stigma around like cutting trees is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, the logical shortcut that people end up taking today is they think, well, trees are beautiful and trees produce oxygen and they store carbon.
Yep.
and let
For a
them
while.
be, and if you cut them, that's a bad thing because those
Yeah.
things are no longer true.
Yeah, but the problem with trees, if you don't cut them, they burn.
Tell me more about that.
And if you don't, well, you look at across the hill here. They're so thick.
Yeah.
And if you got a bad day in the burn, they all burn up. So there goes your carbon storage. All the carbon storage you made is all released
Back in the
in a
atmosphere.
matter of 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. So we get forest fires.
Yeah. So it's a short-term thing. They're pipe dreaming. In
the
100 years from now, all the trees are going to be burned up, one way or another.
Yeah.
But if you thin,
The
only way to get big trees is if you thin out the smaller ones that are
But nobody
Feeding.
wants big trees anymore.
create space around them.
We don't want them. You want something uniform size, easy to manufacture.
What's a good size for modern sawmilling?
The people that like trees,
Oh, well,
forests, they want big trees, and you never.
I know they want it. They
trees.
want everything at your expense.
Yeah, but you could give them both. You can
Well,
get big trees if you.
the Forest Service,
small ones
that's
and
the
leave-
Forest Service job. They got all the big trees they want. And they can't manage them. They burn them all up. So.
So to simplify, there was regulation that came in and said we're not going to cut anything. So it went too far the other extreme, right?
Yeah.
Where there was old growth cutting originally, then it all stopped, and then you said the last 30, 50 years or something, like everything's like becoming really dense on the understory, right?
Yeah, and I mean trees are growing up, and like just the trees per acre is like triple what it's been before.
Which does what when we're talking in terms of like fire destruction?
Well, if there's 3 times as many trees, and they're all about, like our Douglas fir coming into the sawmill is about 50% moisture content. That's a lot of water.
Yeah.
That's now being held in the trees instead of just free in the atmosphere, and so that contributes to drought and just overall dryness in the forests. And then so you've got drier conditions, less water.
Yeah.
And a lot more fuel now, densely packed in these forests.
And fuel is what you just said, like the little
More
limbs and
trees, yeah.
trees and everything.
There's 3 times many trees per acre. It's 3 times as much fuel.
Yeah.
And now it's all drier because trees are holding the water.
Yeah.
And trees they'll start to die. Like you can just look, not on the coast here. It's plenty wet. We get all the fog, but an hour inland, and you can just see patches of dead trees. And they're dead because there's too much competition for water, and they're just drying up and dying.
Which gives it more dry fuel.
Yeah,
and then what
more
happens?
dry fuel, and like trees shouldn't just die for no reason. That just means there's too many trees there. But yeah, and then, every fall, thunderstorms come through and hit the ground 100 different places and start fires.
Jeez.
And it could be like okay, here's a fire here, and that's been like thinned out, and there's not a lot of fuel. We can go in with like a crew and put that out pretty easily.
Yeah.
Or it's like it just blows up.
It could go out, get out of control.
There's 30 years of unmanaged forest and dry understory, and the Cal Fire won't even go if that's the area that it's started in, because there's nothing they can do. It's gonna
And then it just turns
it's
into an
gonna
inferno.
catch the bottom, and then it's gonna catch those small trees, and those are gonna catch the tops of the big trees. And if it was thinned out, it would maybe burn through the understory, but there would be no bridge to get it to the top of the trees, of the big trees.
Yeah.
And like you can see, all these trees have survived fire right here.
And it's
I
green.
mean,
It's
that was
plenty green on top.
That was a big fire. That one actually got away like 100 feet up there, but
But
the
then
tree
top of it is-
survived
yeah.
because, it didn't get all the way to the top and kill the tree.
So fire then.
But if it wasn't thinned, there would have been a tree like half the height that would have burned it to the top and then burnt the top of that one.
So.
And no one's coming into like 100-foot flame.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about it. You just let it burn.
So there's a good in terms of logging and thinning out the forest and using that resource instead of letting it burn. And if it burns, it's like releasing carbon right back into the atmosphere. Because like these trees are absorbing carbon dioxide, storing it in themselves, and then we harvest them and we lock in that carbon, right?
Yeah, if you can store it in the building
Build a building
for
out
long
of it.
term. Yeah, when you build a house, you probably expect it to be there for 100 years.
Well, so the last couple of years, maybe the last decade or so, there's a lot of talk about forest fires. Is it just a thing about the news trying to scare everybody and a clickbait, or is that really, in your experience, in your lifetime, are you seeing more forest fires now than there were earlier?
No, but they're bigger.
They're bigger now.
They're bigger because we've accumulated 70, 80 years of timber and brush that used to be burned all the time. We stopped to think about it. The Indians burned. You had lightning fires. They burned till they went out. Nobody put them out. The ranchers came and they burned. Everybody was burning when I was a kid.
When you were a kid,
All the time.
When you were a kid, you saw a lot of fires.
A lot of fires.
But they went out naturally, or how?
No, they fought them, but they had a lot of people setting them too.
On purpose.
Yeah, sure. All the ranchers burned.
Okay. And so the point was to burn all the fuel.
Burn the
kind of.
brush, and the timber wasn't worth much. And burn it up, get grassland for cattle.
And
like I told you, this was all grass
so when
70
you,
years ago.
how old were you then? 20 years old?
Yeah, probably.
Right around 20 years old?
Yeah.
And this whole hill, this mountainside that's right beside us, is all...
Grass.
That was all grass.
Grass and big oak trees.
Why was it... You were telling me a little bit over dinner.
Well,
but
the Indians were raising it for acorns. They were raising oak trees for acorns. That's what they wanted.
But
and
why did they want
grass
this?
for animals?
They wanted the grass for animals.
Yeah.
And that was the natives doing that?
Yeah.
What tribe was it, do you know?
Well, it was right here was the Hoopas. They're down the road here, 20 miles.
Wow. And so why are the forest fires bigger now and maybe like...
Because right, like I'm telling you right now, when you got grass and they're burning in the fall of the year, the Indians all burn in the fall. I assume they started burning under the trees so they didn't damage their oak trees.
Yeah.
So they start from there and burn out.
Yeah.
And but when I was a kid, around Willits there's forest fires steady. I mean, every fall you could hardly see the sun for months on account of the smoke.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was bad.
And that was normal?
Normal. Everybody burned.
But
Yeah.
they're smaller, more controllable.
Well, they burned every year, so they didn't have all that fuel accumulation.
Right. And we're
You know,
grass,
you kept it
like
burned
small
out.
Shrubs easy to manage, but
They did a lot of it in the fall.
That's not-
They didn't start in August. You know, they wanted to burn late in the year when it was cooler.
I guess my question was just your general observations, and thanks for answering that question about the forest fire. So there's value in burning and value in thinning the forest and cutting the trees down.
Yes.
So like, help me understand that, or the general public, why is there this misconception that harvesting timber is a bad thing? Harvesting, they just like I say, they just want them,
Well,
don't
it's
touch
just
them.
the environmentalists that live in the city are not informed as to what the real facts are.
And if you could go talk to one right now, or if you could broadcast the message, what would the truth be?
Well, the truth is you got to burn. You got to burn or harvest it.
You got to harvest or burn it?
You can either one.
Yeah.
But, you know, the problem with the original harvesting that got a lot of people upset was there wasn't any regulation and it was just terrible. But the problem was old growth. When you got old growth, you go out and look at an old growth forest, you look out there, it's snags. You know what a snag is, a dead tree?
Uh-huh.
Snags all over the place. They wanted you to cut those down, so you cut the snags down. There were a lot of squirrels and their critters lived in the snags.
Uh-huh.
And then you had to cut these old growth trees that were rotten and limby and isolated and that had no commercial value at all. And they made you cut those down. And when you cut them down, you left them. You couldn't afford to haul them to the mill. They weren't any good. So you had all this crap that they made you cut down and do all these things that irritated the public. And most of the real bad stuff was done on the ridge tops where the public was, and just got a bad name because what are you cutting that tree down for, you know?
Yeah.
The answer is the Forest Service made us do it. We don't want it. Nobody wants it, but they wanted to cut the old growth down to raise this nice young second growth.
Understood.
Came out of Germany. The Germans down there at UC wanted to convert all our old growth forest to second growth.
And today, if you go in the city and talk to people, there's a really big negative connotation. There's a big stigma around what we do as sawmill industry or the wood products manufacturers. I think it's a lack of education, like you said. I totally agree with that.
It is,
it's just
but the education has been all negative as far as we're concerned. I mean,
and so
the education has been anti-industry, doing anything that wasn't natural.
why was it anti-industry?
I don't know.
Well, let's inform them.
Yeah.
What would you say to the younger generation today? I don't think they even see a big opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity as I travel to different sawmills.
You watch the TV, and all you see is everything's negative as far as doing anything. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. The environmental people have taken over the publicity, and if you speak out against them, you're a bad guy. You know, you're all for profit. You know.
Yeah, you're capitalist.
Capitalist and all for profit.
But it's good business now. We were just talking with George yesterday that it's good business now to think about the long term and make sure that there is something to cut for the future too.
Well, we're going to have plenty of wood. I know that without the national forest and old growth. The plantations are doing well and probably supply everything we need. And as we transition from single family to apartments, we're going to use a lot less wood. So, you know.
Was the main use for your sawmilling, products, was it lumber then and lumber now, for home construction then and lumber and home construction now?
Yeah, but we're switching more to apartments now.
Okay.
And uses what's the apartment uses about 2/3 less wood per person than building a home.
For a single family.
Yeah. So and that's the other. The environmental community, which I kind of agree with, as long as it's the other guy living in an apartment, not me, but push people into apartments instead of building houses all over ag land and open land. They build houses everywhere down there.
Sure.
The old Sacramento Valley is filling up full of houses.
Important to like your job.
Right.
Really important.
But the big problem with the lumber business has always been interest rates. We're at the mercy of the interest rate, and they use the interest rate to control inflation, I guess, and really not a good idea, I don't think, because you need housing, and we need continual supply of housing. You can't ramp up housing and up and down. Where are you going to get the workers to do all this stuff? And after that 2008 housing bust, we lost a huge number of not mill construction, but housing construction workers. Went back to Mexico and never came back.
Wow.
The economy got good down there, and we just don't have the people now to do the construction.
Is that one of the biggest needs right now in the sawmill industry, you think, is people?
We need people, but we also need not cheap interest rates, but level interest rates. So you don't have one guy sitting on a mortgage rate of 3 and won't sell his house because if he goes to another one, he's going to pay 7. So they don't move. They just freeze where they are. They don't even change their home or they get bigger or smaller or whatever. It's just
Yeah, but workers is a big problem.
big workers.
They put out something for, jobs available, and would you have the youngest one, probably the youngest in the mills in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
No, they
Young
had
ones show
about
up, work
2
3 days
younger
and
ones
quit.
walk in and turn around and leave because they weren't interested.
Right.
So
Do you guys think that the wood industry is going to be relevant long into the future? Wood
Yeah,
products industry is going to be relevant.
I'm a lot
for
more
while?
optimistic now than I was at 30.
Say it again.
I'm more optimistic now than I was at 30.
About the wood products industry?
Yeah, I thought at 30, why, it's going to be a kind of a dying thing, Cut out the old growth, that's going to be the end of it. But it hasn't happened. Free farms all over the world, and plenty of timber, plenty of good for construction. Now we have the cross-laminated timber and glue lambs, and
Mass timber.
so things get better for the timber industry. But we might be overproducing the amount of trees we need. Might be a problem.
Sorry, what would the problem be?
Too many trees.
Too many trees.
Well, they're all fertilizing and growing timber in 30, 40 years, and if you stop and calculate out the amount of timberland you got, and if you put it all on high production, why, there's no way you could use all the lumber. Just way overproduced. The other thing is the efficiency of the recoveries that we get nowadays. The overrun factor back when I was young, people didn't really pay much attention to it, but it might have been 15, 20%. Now we're at 100 plus recovery by smaller target sizes and thinner kerfs and better positioning. It's a world of difference from when I started.
Wow.
We went from about 30, I think we were running about 35% overrun and dug fir, and brought it up over 100.
Maybe somebody who's watching doesn't understand what the overrun means. What does that mean in simple terms?
Well, the log scale, when it was developed by cutting 1-inch boards with a circle saw and a very unreliable method of set works of controlling the thickness.
Yep.
So they ran all these tests way back when, and determined if you bought a log 10-inch in diameter, you would cut a certain number of boards out of it.
Right.
But it was done with these old equipment and thick saws and cutting all 1 inch. Yeah, so you'd say, well, there's 30 board feet in that log, if you saw that log.
Yeah.
But now, with cutting 2 inch instead of 1 inch and target sizes moving down, the overrun moved up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really doesn't make any sense. And there's really no way to measure a log that makes any sense. You can go by weight or you can go by cubic,
Yeah.
but it still doesn't make any sense. It's just a way of buying it.
Sure.
But the big difference is when you got out of old growth timber to second growth, the world changed then.
Right.
What you could do. That mill we saw yesterday, you couldn't cut an old growth log on that thing if you had to.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I guess to wrap it up, one of the things I was telling George yesterday was like how I'm really passionate and I am excited about the future of the wood products industry and how you know, us people are using a lot of wood and wood resource, wood fiber, and so many different things in our daily life. Everything from everybody's ordering from Amazon now, and you're getting Amazon packages all the time.
Yeah.
So you're using that cardboard, you know, the wood fiber goes into making cardboard to make your packaging to get you your whatever you're ordering. But like, I see it as I was sharing with George yesterday. In Genesis chapter 1 in the Bible, when God made people and he put them on this planet, he says, multiply and subdue the earth.
Yeah.
And that key word, I believe, subdue, is exactly what the wood products industry has been doing, is doing, and will be doing in the future. I think it's a wonderful word, that subdue word. It doesn't mean just preserve, don't touch it.
Yeah.
It means use it, utilize it,
Yeah.
be stewards of it, harness that natural resource.
Yeah. Well, you know,
What is that?
the problem is when you go to, it's a frog.
Is that just a frog?
Yeah.
Sure a noisy one.
Yeah, I know it, but you lose the diversity. And that's what they're beating on you now, whether you're raising date palms and cutting down tropical rainforests to raise date palms, or rubber trees, or mowing down the hardwoods to raise softwoods.
Yeah.
You lose the diversity, and when you lose diversity, you lose a lot of animals that require the diversity, and that's the whole crux of the environmental movement. Is if you go into one crop, there's a whole range of animals that can't survive.
Yeah.
And that's where the Forest Service, with their method, can supply the diversity and of habitat. The problem is they burn it and make smoke. People don't like that, but the fact of the matter is that's the way it's always evolved. The forests have always burned, and it's just a natural thing. Smoke is natural, and my feeling was before the white man came, the world was pretty smoky in the United States. Everybody burned, nobody put a fire out. You started a fire, burned the one out.
So, all right, the final question is this. Do you encourage people, young people, all kinds of people, to enter and join the wood products industry today?
Yeah, I would. I think
future
it's
there?
going to be a viable source of building materials forevermore, And probably the treatments and the painting and everything's going to get better, So I see nothing out there that can really replace it. We always thought steel was going to do the job, but that failed miserably. And wood will last a long, long time if it doesn't get wet. You're talking thousands of years. Wood will survive if it doesn't get wet.
Mm-hmm.
So what better? It's easy to use. It's sound dampening. It's insulating. It's got a lot of advantages over any other product. Maybe they'll figure out how to build a concrete house that will put wood out of business, but I doubt it.
Right.
They're trying to print them, You've seen the printer.
Yeah.
No one's buying those houses.
But,
Yeah. So wood's viable.
yeah. So, it's so flexible. So I think, it's going to be good business from now on. It may not be very profitable if they keep overproducing it. I mean, that's one thing people don't quite figure out. You can't overproduce a market. And we're going to find that out in semiconductors here in about 2 or 3 years when they get all the plants built.
Before I forget, I didn't ask you to introduce yourself. Could you state your name and your name, last name, and where we are?
My name is George Schmidbauer, and we're in Willow Creek, California, sitting on a deck overlooking the river.
It's beautiful. And your name, ma'am?
Peggy Schmidbauer.
Peggy Crawford Schmidbauer.
Beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of it and sharing your house here this evening with me, letting me join. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed listening to
You're
your
welcome.
story. Enjoyed becoming friends with George.
We only had one bad experience tonight, the damn overdone steak.
I think having a Tesla is not mutually exclusive from being in the wood products industry. I love the forest and the conservation and the stewardship of the land. I love the production of the forest. I love the fact that we're able to harvest trees, replant sustainably, and make out of softwood trees, which there's an abundance of them here in Northern California where I'm at now. It's just really, really cool to see how people are stewarding the natural resource. And specifically, when I was visiting North Fork Lumber and other sawmills in the area, you can see that all of their processes, they're all really, really focused on optimizing the resource. They're trying to make the most out of what they get, which is the raw materials coming in, the big logs. So, again, I love the fact that this industry is stewarding the land, stewarding the resource, and doing good by the people, the environment,